History gets polished, edges smoothed. But revolutions are not clean. They are born in fire, in smoke, in men who hold the line when fear claws at the ribs. Victory was not inevitable. The revolution was forged in war. But it is understood in conversation, around tables, between friends, with books open and arguments alive. This is Rogue Island, ground truth of the American Revolution.
Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Rogue Island. I'm your co-host, Ben Powers, and I'm joined tonight by...
I am Bjorn Bruckshaw, and this is
Grace Bruckshaw.
Awesome. And so tonight we're going to be doing the first of a three-part series of episodes about Benedict Arnold. And as everybody who does tune in knows, that Rogue Island is a show about the American Revolution with Rhode Island connections. And the question is going to be, what's the connection of Benedict Arnold to Rhode Island? So Bjorn's going to give us a quick explanation of that, and then we're going to roll into the discussion.
So, first of all, happy Memorial Week. I hope everybody had a good week. Benedict Arnold, as everybody knows, born in Connecticut. Well, people don't realize his family comes from a long descendant or line of descendants dating all the way back to Roger Williams from Rhode Island. So Benedict Arnold's father was born in Rhode Island, and then when he was younger, moved to Connecticut. And his grandfather was actually, and great-grandfather were part of the government in Rhode Island. So that's where our Rhode Island connection comes from then.
Okay, outstanding. So let's just jump right in and we'll have a conversation about the early career of Benedict Arnold.
Absolutely.
Benedict Arnold's early career, he was an avowed patriot, and he was commissioned as a Continental Army officer very early in the American Revolution. So we're going to discuss the first 2 years of his career in this particular episode, 1775 up to the end of 1776. So when he was living in Connecticut, he was originally an apprentice to an apothecary, which was like a druggist or a pharmacist, but he was looking to have a more socially prominent role, and once he went into business for himself, he expanded his own druggist business to start selling other goods and wares. And then he eventually started trading in goods and wares, becoming a merchant captain and investing in other merchant ships and making commercial voyages down to the Caribbean and bringing goods back to the colonies, and also helping to export raw materials from the American colonies where they needed to go. So he amassed a pretty significant fortune and became more prominent in public affairs as his business success grew. And he became a militia officer and received like a rudimentary education as part of the militia. And all this sort of reflected his personality, which was very aggressive. He was very ambitious. He for always improving himself, and he brought a lot of energy to whatever activity he was participating in. And he brought that to his activities as a patriot, and he brought that to his activities as a Continental Army officer once he received his commission.
Hey Ben, real quick, I'm
Sure.
sorry to cut you off. Grace came up with a question, and you want to ask him real quick? Oh, let her here. There you go. She wrote it down and she had thought about it. So go ahead.
Why didn't he join the Navy?
Since he had experience in shipping.
So the reason we're going to talk about him in sort of a naval role later in this episode, but the major reason that he didn't join the Navy was the fact that there was no such Continental Navy. At the time, there was not even really a Continental Army, and his role as a military officer prior to the war, the only way you could get any military experience was to be in the militia. There was not an opportunity. There was not a militia equivalent for the seagoing service. So he already had experience as an officer. And then once the battles of Lexington and Concord occurred on 19 April, and then word spread, and different militias, especially those from the New England, were heading to Boston to help the army of observation that was forming around Boston. It was all a land-based campaign. And he progressed so rapidly that by the time Congress got around to forming a navy and looking for naval officers, he was so ensconced in the Continental Army, I imagine it never even crossed his mind. So
Gotcha.
early in the war, it was opportunity. All the opportunities were for land-based officers. And then by the time the Continental Navy really became a thing, Arnold was already head and shoulders above most Continental Army officers, and that's where he was making the name for himself. That's a really good question, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Good job.
Thank you.
So he gets up to Boston in May of 1775 with a contingent of Connecticut militia, and he immediately is dispatched up to kind of dispatches himself actually, but he's sent by the Massachusetts Committee of Safety to help secure Fort Ticonderoga. He runs into Ethan Allen, the Green Mountain Boys, who are doing the same thing, and they form sort of a tenuous alliance. But he's there at the fall of Fort Ticonderoga, and he's back in Cambridge by June. And June 14th, 1775. I know your dad knows this as a former soldier. That's the birthday of the Army, and that's the date that the Continental Army was formed by. The Continental Congress. So soon after that, Arnold actually receives a Continental Commission. He's now part of what would be the regular army today. He's no longer a militia officer, and he receives a commission as the colonel of the 2nd Connecticut Regiment, which is participating in the siege of Boston. Now, at this same time, up in the Northern Department, which covers the area of upstate New York up to the Canadian border. That's under command of a general named Philip Schuyler. I know you know who Philip Schuyler is, Grace, being a big Hamilton fan. And he is dispatching an expedition up to Canada to see if the Canadians are willing to join the rebellion, sort of become the 14th colony to rebel. And that expedition, excuse me, is under the command of a guy named Richard Montgomery, who is a former British officer. He's now a general officer, and he's leading about 1,400 men up to Montreal. And if they succeed in Montreal, they're to press forward to Quebec. And Arnold gets wind of this expedition that's going north, and he's thinking, a two-pronged attack might make sense. And he comes up with a plan to approach Quebec through the Maine wilderness, and he and Montgomery can join forces at the gates of Quebec, and he can reinforce that attack and maybe help Quebec fall. And Washington approves of that expedition, and so, and I want to say it was in August of 1775. Arnold puts together a provisional unit. He doesn't take his own regiment, the 2nd Connecticut, but he gets volunteers from a variety of Continental units that are participating in the Siege of Boston, guys who are looking for a little more adventure. The Siege of Boston's kind of boring, not much is happening. And they depart Newburyport, Massachusetts, and they go by sea up to the mouth of the Kennebec River in what is today Maine. At the time, that was still part of Massachusetts colony, but it's in where Maine is today. And when they get there, they are met by a force that had gone ahead and was working with local contractors to build river traversing crafts like, pirogues, canoes, bateaux, things that can move men and supplies up the river, very shallow draft boats. And they face a very arduous couple of months going up the Kennebec River, and they have to portage, and then they eventually wind up, I want to say, on the Richelieu River. And then they take that to the St. Lawrence, and they are before the gates of Quebec. But it was a really arduous trek. The terrain was really bad. They lost a bunch of guys to sickness, like 200 men to sickness or injuries, accidents. Some died, some had to be left in place. The provisional force had been divided into 3 provisional battalions under the command of Daniel Morgan. We all know and love him. Christopher Green, a guy we've discussed many
Boy.
times on this show. And the 3rd battalion was under a guy named Roger Enos, who was a Connecticut officer. And Enos actually took his battalion back like in October of 1775. He was like, this isn't going well. My guys are in danger. Mission isn't going to succeed. And he took it upon himself to bring his troops back. And so he took a lot of combat power away from Arnold by saying, hey, we're out. So it was almost like a mass desertion, except they didn't desert and run away. He brought him back to Cambridge. He went back to work basically, but he was still court-martialed for that. The court-martial actually acquitted him though, and he wound up in command of another unit of Connecticut state troops, but he never had a major combat command again. But
Sorry, Ben. Did they ever hit resistance on their way up to Canada?
no,
Anything?
I really think this was a matter of they were going up such no-go terrain. I don't think the British ever suspected that
Yeah.
they would need to garrison this this route. They just didn't expect anybody to come that way. So the major battle is definitely against the elements. And there's an
Now,
excellent.
oh,
Go ahead.
so was Montgomery already past Montreal by the time Benedict Arnold left, or was Montgomery headed to Montreal when Arnold left? Do you
Oh,
know?
I don't know the timing exactly, although they basically are moving and not in sync because there's no way to synchronize those two different
Yeah.
operations, but they were moving at roughly the same time.
Okay. Okay.
But there's a really good book called Through a Howling Wilderness by a guy named Tom Desjardins, which talks about the Quebec exhibition from Arnold's standpoint. And it really shows how the enemy was the terrain because he's got roughly uh, 800 guys with him when they get to the walls of Quebec, and they got to take a long operational pause to get food, gather together, get medical supplies, and kind of reconstitute the force. And it's not till the end of December that Montgomery has taken Montreal. He's moved his forces up, and then you have Arnold's forces are, reconstituted enough to make an assault. And at this point, the British defenders under Commander General Guy Carleton, is about 1,800 of them, and they know that the Americans are out there. They're technically besieged. You and I were talking about this off camera. It's not a formal siege. There's no engineering equipment. There's very little artillery. Arnold could bring no artillery with him. And in my research, I learned that Montgomery had maybe 10 field pieces total, four field cannons and six small mortars, but not enough to, crack the walls of a bastion or anything like that. So it's not a formal siege where they're sapping forward and building parallels and then
Yeah.
battering down a a practicable breach and all that. The attack plan is really to take Quebec by storm and take it by surprise. So I want to say it was the last night of December in 1775, and in a major snowstorm is when Montgomery and Arnold do a two-pronged attack against the defenses of Quebec. And it starts off, no one's expecting an attack in such a storm, so they've definitely got the element of surprise on their side. But they very quickly, Arnold and his column, he's got Daniel Morgan with him, he's one of his subordinate leaders. They hit an obstacle, they start negotiating the obstacle, and they come under fire. And Arnold's wounded. He's wounded in the leg, and it's a pretty bad wound. He's out of the fight. Like he can't lead as he's wounded. So you've got the leadership being one of the major elements of combat power. You've got the key leader taken out of the fight already. Morgan takes command and he leads uh, his men over this obstacle, which is literally a barrier that is built up in a city street. And he gets over to the other side, but not a lot of guys went with him, and he was very quickly captured. And there's a really cool story about Morgan that the enemy demand his sword, and he breaks it against a wall rather than surrendering his sword. But he gets captured. Arnold is not captured. He's wounded, but he gets evacuated. Christopher Green's also captured. Uh, uh, Arnold loses a lot of his troops in that attack, and so his wing of the attack is out of the fight. Unfortunately, Montgomery gets killed. So the same thing happens with his column. They're left leaderless and they're repulsed pretty quickly as well. So Quebec is successfully defended.
How many men did Montgomery have?
Montgomery had roughly the same amount. His column was about 1,400 when they started their mission
Yeah.
to get up to Quebec, and he lost roughly 400 guys. So he has maybe 1,000 and
So it's
a
pretty
little
much
less.
like even on both sides, but the British are hunkered down in
Exactly.
Quebec,
And
right?
we always talk you shouldn't apply 21st century doctrine to the 18th century, but you figure assaulting any fixed position, you need a 3-to-1 advantage as the
Yeah.
attacker, and these odds are roughly even. The snowstorm helps initially to kind of swing the odds in the attacker's favor, but once they lose two key combat leaders and they bog down, it's all over.
I mean, especially with no artillery, right? No, I mean to to have such a long attack or siege, as we would call it, without artillery, that's just it's mind-boggling to think what they were thinking and how they think they can get over it.
I think that they were under the impression that if they could move quickly, the element of surprise, it would be the sort of speed is their tactical advantage. If they could negotiate the obstacles quickly and achieve what's called relative superiority and get a lot of their troops into the town before the defense can be brought against them, they could kind of just overawe the defenders with getting so many attackers into the fight so quickly. But as I said, they bought the attack bogged down and they lost that relative superiority very quickly.
And Christopher Green was captured as
That's
well.
correct. Christopher
Right.
Green's captured as well. So this takes us into 1776, and Arnold recovers from his wounds in the through the early spring of 1776. In January of 1776, he's actually promoted to brigadier general. He's still working for Philip Schuyler. He's not the senior guy in the theater, but he's kind of the senior guy on the ground. And the idea that they still want to try to take Quebec is foremost in their mind going into 1776. But by the springtime, it becomes apparent that the Canadians are not interested in rallying to the rebel cause. They're not getting a lot of reinforcements or local volunteers. So the idea becomes that the remnants of the American army needs to retreat south into New York and rejoin the Northern Department. And so that's exactly what happens. By May of 1776, they've pulled out of Canada and they're moving back down into no, upstate New York.
Grace had a question for you, Ben.
Sure.
So, go ahead.
How did he become the arrogant officer that he became? Was it because of his childhood, or was it because he's grown up?
How did he become the arrogant officer that he became?
Yeah.
I think that was his personality. He would have been an arrogant private. He would have been an arrogant NCO. He would have been uh, there's a saying sometimes that you're not arrogant if you can back it up. And he was definitely the kind of guy who would do what he said he would do or go down swinging. I mean, the only reason he fell out of the Quebec fight was he was badly wounded. So he had great faith in himself. And I think that stems from his childhood where he had to really work hard to earn everything he achieved. And he had a struggle for acceptance. He had a struggle to advance. And that carried over and really affected his personality. So I think part of it is literally just how God made him. Some men are, and some women are made to be aggressive. Your dad is an excellent example of somebody who is made to be aggressive. Some people are made to be more chill, and I'm an excellent example of that. So Benedict Arnold, I think by temperament and his experience made him just a very arrogant, aggressive person. But
Do you
he
think that
also,
helped him? Oh,
go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No,
Do you
please.
think that helped his commission into the Continental Army as
I
an
think it
officer?
helped. I think it helped him initially because he it was like not going to back down, not going to say no for an answer. I think we're going to see as we go into this three-part series how that arrogance over time can kind of curdle, and instead of being an asset, started to work against him. But
Yeah,
at this point in
people
his
turn
career,
against.
it's very much an asset.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, um, and like you said, as we go on, you're gonna see his arrogance and that I deserve this, I deserve that type attitude come into play. And another thought of mine was, how he felt, how he reacted to the Quebec loss. Was he arrogant? Oh, and blame somebody else, or did he take responsibility for it?
I think it was a matter. He was seen to have done everything that he could do. So even though they weren't successful at the same time, I think he was seen as a guy who could get things done, a guy who to give the difficult missions to. Just the fact that he got to Quebec at that point and was, received an honorable wound in combat, that was enough to kind of add luster to his reputation. So I
Gotcha.
don't think anybody was looking to censure him. He did everything that was expected of him in that scenario.
Gotcha. Interesting. And how long before he came back to the?
So they are retrograding out of Canada in the spring, and
Okay,
by June he's down along the Champlain, Lake
gotcha.
Champlain, and we're
Perfect.
going to talk about that. So as the Americans pull out of Canada, the British are preparing to advance from Canada down into upstate New York and try to take Albany and just invest the northern colonies from Canada. It's a sort of a prototype plan similar to the one we'll talk about with Burgoyne's Albany campaign when we talk about 1777. But everything coming out of Canada is very tied to waterways. You go down or up the St. Lawrence River, you hit Lake Champlain, you come down Lake Champlain, you portage over to Lake George down to the Hudson. Um, and so it's a water-based campaign. Guy Carleton, who is the British commander, he's bringing, I want to say, like an 8,000 man force. I'm not sure of the total numbers of his army, but he's got like 25 different warships with him to include, I
Holy
think it was
cow.
the HMS Invincible, which was a heavily gunned frigate. He's got 50 transports for his combat troops. This is an invading army, and
So
there's
needless to say, the waterways were crucial.
exactly. And there's no naval force on Lake Champlain to stop
Yeah.
him. So Schuyler gives the mission to Arnold, hey, dude, build a navy, basically. And Arnold's the guy to do it. He's a sea captain, he's a merchant. He knows how ships are built, he knows how business is done. And so he works feverishly with local contractors. They build a shipyard at the southern uh, tip of Lake Champlain. And by October, they've got a small fleet of 15 ships built. Some are galleys that are rowed, some are powered by sail. None of them are particularly heavily armed, but he still has a naval force. And Arnold realizes that they're not going to be able to inflict a decisive defeat on a major 25 ship fleet that includes a heavily armed frigate. But he believes that if he can use the terrain of Lake Champlain, which is kind of weird when you think about a lake having terrain, but
Yeah.
isn't it just a flat surface of water? But he feels that if he can position his fleet in a certain part of the lake, which we'll talk about on the next slide, he might be able to uh, bring battle to the British on favorable terms to the point where he can slow Carleton down long enough that they might not be able to successfully have a 1776 campaign. It's already very late in the campaigning season by the time these two fleets meet. The Battle of Valcour Island, uh, it takes place on the 11th of October of 1776. So it's already very late in the campaigning season. You and I have been in upstate New York
Yeah.
in September, and it's already starting to get cool. And we've been there in October, where the mornings are quite cold, and you're rolling into winter by early November.
So
So
did they set up any defensive positions within that waterway, like chains or scuttled ships or any of that
no,
stuff?
there's no, because chains and scuttled ships are good, like good river defenses where it's particularly narrow, but they need to be tied to land. It's kind of like when you set up an obstacle is not an obstacle if it's not overwatched. So
Yep.
there's not enough co land-based combat power to oversee like a chain or those types of obstacles. This is going to be a fleet on fleet action. And
Eh,
so
Gotcha.
there's an island called Valcour Island, which kind of creates a channel within Lake Champlain. And that is the maritime terrain that Arnold decides to use. He believes that if he can force battle between the island and the shore itself, he could kind of canalize the British fleet as it comes in, and they can engage in smaller piecemeal battles rather than having to deal with the entire fleet at once.
So like a choke point, like we would call
Exactly.
today in today's
That's
military language.
precisely it. It's a maritime choke point, and it's the battle goes the British in the British favor, and that was never in doubt. But it lasts a fairly long time, and it inflicts significant damage on Carleton's fleet.
It
And so,
does.
even though it's a tactical loss for Arnold, it has a big operational impact because Carleton's got to take a break for repairs. He's got to reconstitute his forces. And very soon after, within 3 weeks after the battle, he realizes that they're not going to achieve any of his operational objectives for that campaign. And he decides to go back to Canada and reset. And that kind of sets the stage for Burgoyne to go back to England and sell his concept for a northern campaign for the 1777 campaign season. So Arnold, even though he's tactically not successful during the battle, he achieves his operational mission and he adds to his reputation. Not only as a fighting general, but in this instance, kind of like an admiral, a guy who can
Yeah.
get stuff
Yeah.
done wherever you ask him to.
So it's funny. So I was reading an article, and there's a museum that actually had divers had found one of the boats that Benedict Arnold commanded that had been sunk during that battle. and they actually were able to lift it up and bring it, and it was preserved and everything. And you could see this big, huge cannonball hole into the side of it.
Oh, that's amazing. That's really
Yeah.
cool.
So
Was it the kind of gunboat that you and I had seen when we were up in Albany? It's got like
absolutely.
one cannon on the front and
Yeah.
it's, you know,
It
operated
was
by
more, it was a
manpower.
little bit smaller, but it had a swivel gun on front.
Interesting. Very cool.
Right. So if people want to look, I forgot where it is, and maybe I could post a link or we could post the picture to it. But there's a picture of it, and you can look at it, and you can see a direct hole right in the side of that thing, and it must have been maybe an 8 pound, 6 pound cannonball that went pierced right through it.
That's amazing. Well,
And it's preserved.
we'll definitely post a link in the description.
Yeah, absolutely.
Grace, you got any other questions for us, kid?
She does. She wrote them down,
But she's prepared.
so yep, right here.
What was the main reason behind the failure of the Battle of Quebec?
The main reason behind the failure of the Battle of Quebec was the fact that the two key leaders that were on the American side were taken out of the battle so early that they could not motivate their troops to continue the attack. They could not exercise any kind of control. Montgomery was killed. That affected the morale of his column. Arnold was badly wounded. That affected the morale of his column. They could not lead by personal example anymore. So it was the loss of those two key leaders very early in the fight.
And also, to piggyback off of that, Ben, is once Benedict Arnold goes down, Montgomery goes down, now you look to your lower, officers, right? Now you have Morgan who gets captured. You have Green that's get captured. Now there must be, all these troops just like hectic going on.
Exactly. I mean, the chain of command is breaking down in real time. You're exactly right.
Right. So it's like, now, what are we doing? Our officers just got captured. Are we just going to sit here out in the snow type deal?
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely
Now, was there any of that during the Battle of Valcour Island within the boats itself? Like any confusion, was Benedict Arnold right there in the front commanding, or was he off in the back,
No, Arnold being Arnold, he led from the front. He commanded his own ship, and that ship was in the thick of the fighting.
It was.
So it was definitely the fact that he's facing, almost 2-to-1 odds, and they still were able to hold their own, I think shows the type of leader that he was.
Especially when you go against the HMS Invisible.
Yeah, exactly.
The name gives it away itself, right?
Exactly.
What kind of guns did they have on those? Were they small 6-pounders? What were they?
I don't know what the Invincible had in terms of its complement, but you're looking at larger caliber guns on a frigate. You could maybe an 18-pounder, 24-pounder. I'm not sure though. Naval armament is not my specialty. Yeah. But as you stated, you're looking at very small caliber of guns on the Patriot ships, things like swivel guns, or you might have a 6-pounder mounted in the bow kind of thing. They were a much smaller fleet. They were never going to inflict a tactical defeat. Their whole mission was just to harass and delay, almost like guerrilla warfare at sea.
Gotcha. It kind of reminds me of the story between the race of the turtle and the hare, because right, you got these small ships moving in and out, maneuvering quick, and then you got these larger ships slow. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So that's what I think, and that's what I think gives Benedict Arnold the ability to do what he's doing. Because how much turn could one of the HMS Invisible do, right? Compared to the smaller ships that Benedict Arnold have.
That's a really good point. You definitely have more maneuverability, and he used that to his advantage, especially in that narrow channel between the island and the shore. So it's he definitely used every advantage he had at his disposal.
Going through a chokehold choke point.
Exactly.
I mean, the choke point with ships like the HMS Gaspee would clog up that area. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So that kind of ends the discussion in terms of what I wanted to talk about tonight with Benedict Arnold. Our second episode, we're going to focus on the 1777 campaign, where Arnold plays another prominent role and he adds more luster to his reputation. And then we're going to roll into a third episode sometime at the end of June, maybe early July, that focuses more on when Arnold sort of starts to turn against the Patriot cause. I wanted to share really briefly some really cool resources. I mentioned Through a Howling Wilderness by Thomas Desjardins is a great book on the campaign in Quebec. It's focused on his mission going up the Kennebec River. The other three titles are all just very good analyses of Arnold as a man and an officer. So, Grace, any other questions before we ring off tonight?
She wrote a few down. So
You got to make sure she's on camera. She's leaning
oh
forward.
yeah, you got to come back over here, kid. All right. So, here. So how she asked him about how being shot in the leg affected him.
Oh yeah. How does being shot in the leg like affect him at battles?
So initially it affected him in the Battle of Quebec because it took him out of the fight, but he made a good recovery. Uh, what happens though, when he's fighting in 1777 during the Second Battle of Saratoga in the vicinity of the redoubts, he gets shot in the same leg again. And not only is he shot in the same leg again, his horse gets shot and falls on that leg. So that created a major compounding injury that he never fully recovered from. Saratoga is his last big combat campaign as an American officer. Once he turns his coat, he does go on campaign for the British, both in Connecticut and in Virginia. But that's after a prolonged recovery, maybe 3 years of recovery. And when he is strong enough to come back on duty as an American officer in 1778, 1779 timeframe is when he's given non-combat duty because he is not well enough to fight anymore. And that has a major effect on his psyche because he's made his reputation as a combat officer. So the original injury, if he hadn't been injured again, he might have been able to stay in a combat role throughout the war as an American officer. But once he's wounded again at Saratoga, that takes a major toll on him. And that's kind of the start of his fall from grace.
Yeah. So we went up there when Grace and I, and Ben and I, we did the dig up at, you remember Bemis Heights, right? The monument that's there, right, of Benedict Arnold. Do you remember what it is?
But
Well, yeah,
actually, it's like a leg.
it's the leg. And do you remember what it says?
No.
It states something along the lines, correct me if I'm wrong, Benz, that this monument is dedicated to the only patriotic thing about Benedict Arnold. Something along those lines.
That's a very good summary or a paraphrase.
Right? So, it shows that monument tells a lot. That monument tells a story, right? They understood he took a bullet for his country, but that's the only thing that's worth saving.
Exactly.
So I have one more question for you, Ben, real quick. How far in between Battle of Quebec was Valcour Island?
Almost a year.
Okay.
Because Battle of Quebec takes place at the end of December 1775. The fight at Valcour doesn't take place till October of 1776.
Now, how many men were actually ended up with him at Valcour Island? Do you know?
It was 15 ships. So we could probably say roughly, I don't know how big the crews were on each ship. But I would say less than 1,000 total.
And did Montgomery's men, after Montgomery fell, end up just combining with his force?
Well, initially, yes, but by the time he's at Valcour Island, he's got a completely fresh set of troops. I wouldn't say fresh, like brand new, they just showed up, but they've had a major reorganization after the retreat from Canada.
Gotcha. And I do want to say one more. So the whole I'm sure everybody watching, we've heard about the 44 Revolutionary War soldiers that they just found up in New York and reinterred and all that. Well, reading and reading into it. Well, first of all, they were building an apartment complex where those soldiers had died, and that's how they found them.
Amazing.
Right. And what had happened and what the historians say was they were sick. There was a hospital there. They were coming back down from Quebec, from that Quebec campaign. They died from sickness. Was smallpox. And they died, and they put a mass grave there. And while they had found these bodies, there was a button where they traced it back to the 1st Pennsylvania Regiment. And that 1st Pennsylvania Regiment was the first regiment that was commissioned, I guess you could say, in the Continental Army, that was made part of that Continental Army.
That's so cool.
Isn't it?
I love those little details.
And all of they stated the 44 soldiers were between the ages of 18 and 23.
War is a young man's game. That's for sure, man.
Back then, I would say it is. Now it's a smart man's game.
But anyway, so next week, I think we're going to have a special guest that you've arranged for us, and in the next 2 weeks, I should say, and then we'll come back to Battle of Saratoga at the end of June, and then mid-July we'll do our 3rd part of the Benedict Arnold series. I want to give Grace the opportunity, see if she's got one more.
You got one more question for Ben? So,
or Dad.
Yeah, or well, how about that one? I know we're talking about Saratoga and all that in a couple weeks, but we did mention it a little bit. Why don't you ask that one?
Why did he disobey direct orders at the Battle of Saratoga?
Okay, that's a cool question. You and I have talked about this one before, but the cool thing is he actually didn't disobey direct orders. That was kind of the myth for the longest time, that he was brooding in his tent and that Gates was, as the overall commander, did not get along with Arnold, and he thought that Arnold was a disobedient officer and he forbid him from going to the battle, but that Arnold had to ride to the sound of the guns. But our good friend and historian Eric Schnitzer has done a lot of great research, and he has found letters that indicate that they were actually on fairly decent terms on the day of the Battle of Bemis Heights, and Arnold received permission to go out to where the sound of the guns were coming from and see what was going on, and to basically take command. So the myth that he disobeyed orders has been very effectively debunked by good historians like Eric Schnitzer.
That's awesome, because now, everybody, it kind of like lessens how people think of him in my point of view, right? Because you think of this hardcore, I'm going to do what I want type thing. And then you hear how Eric, debunked it. He didn't do what he wanted, right? He listened and he did what he was supposed to.
He goes up a little bit in my esteem, at least for that portion of his career, because of that,
Absolutely. And it's not, being shot in the leg and then his horse falling on him, which is just, bad luck, if you could say what bad luck is. That's the definition of it. So yeah, understandable.
All right, guys. Well, I think that we're just about out of time. So thanks again for tuning in. I'm Ben Powers.
And I'm Bjorn Bruckshaw. And
Grace Brookshaw.
And so tune in next time. Thanks for joining us tonight, guys. Goodbye.
Have a good night. Thanks for joining us.